Did you know that less than 15% of people meet guidelines for recommended amounts of physical activity during pregnancy? As healthcare providers, it is our duty to promote health and wellness throughout the lifespan, and the perinatal period is all too often overlooked. Our clients look to us for guidance on this, and we do the best we can with the knowledge we have, but that's often based on a combination of life experiences, common sense, and myths. My new course, Exercise in the Perinatal Period for Healthcare Providers, is designed for providers who are motivated to improve their ability to support their clients in getting or staying active throughout the perinatal period, including their postpartum return to fitness. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, special episode disclaimer. I think everybody listening knows at this point that I have been doing every bit of this podcast by myself. I think everybody also who's listened to, practically every episode knows that I have a friend who's a podcast producer who helped me out immensely just in terms of helping me get organized, do some things better, streamline the process. But I still do this all by myself, which is why when I had some health stuff going on, I got really behind. Anyway, this episode was an idea that I came up with as I was planning my social media posts for around the time that I was getting married. And I realized that I should probably put a picture up of the wedding of me and my new husband. And in doing so, I made a silly joke on that post, calling him my midhusband, introducing him as my midhusband. And that led to this idea that I know how funny some of the things my friends' husbands, the things that they say, I know how funny they can be. And I just decided I wanted to share them with you. But this is a style of podcast editing that is by no means in my wheelhouse, that I have zero experience and probably zero business engaging in. So bear with me, and I hope that you will at least find this enjoyable, despite it being potentially rough around the edges. Hey everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the Motherwit Podcast, a show about the issues we, healthcare consumers and providers, face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share strategies we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on.
Okay.
She's going to reach behind, and then you just hold the foot up like that.
Okay. So wait, are we pushing?
Yeah. Well, yes.
Okay, well, I don't
pick it
know.
up yet.
Oh, sorry.
No, good.
Don't pick it up yet.
I feel like last time somebody flew on a conch shell or some kind of call to arms. I don't know.
A formal announcement.
Yeah.
A little bit more subtle.
This is a clip from a podcast called I'd Better Start Writing This Down, which is written and produced by Joe Stracci, who is the husband of a midwife named Danielle Stracci. What you just heard is a little snippet of episode 25 of season 3 called Are We Pushing? It is a beautiful story told by a loving husband and father. I can't recommend it highly enough. But it's also the traditional making of a midhusband, the husband of a midwife. This story is really not my story, but I feel like we should tell the more traditional story of how a midhusband comes to be before we dive into my own story. So, as I'm trying to say, this is not the case for me because I don't have children with my midhusband, and we never will. We're both older, and it's done. The shop is closed for both of us in that regard. Furthermore, I don't attend births when we're together. When I do attend births, I get on an airplane first, and I either sleep at the hospital if I sleep, or I sleep in a hotel far, far away from him. So he hears some stories, of course, but all in all, he's had an entirely different type of internship than the one you're about to hear.
Matter-of-fact way that tends to exclude me.
I've learned some of the lingo over the years. Can do a pitch-perfect impression of Danielle on a 2 a.m. phone call with the answering service. Yeah, hi.
What were you just saying?
I was just recounting how I know your exact conversation with the answering service whenever you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, hi, this is Danielle. Okay, go ahead, I'll talk to her. Yeah, hi, this is Danielle Stracci, the midwife. Supatera. Yes, hi, is this Gladys? Gladys? Is there something wrong with your connection? Okay, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. Okay, and how far apart are the contractions? I said, how far apart are the contractions? Okay. What have you been eating today? How much water? I said, how much water have you drank? Okay, well, you can come in and we'll put you on the monitor. Okay. How far are you from the hospital? I said, how far are you from the hospital? Okay. I'm gonna call them and let them know that you're coming in. Do you happen to remember if you're GBS positive or negative? GBS positive or negative?
I mean, this is like the big times. Like, only the real deal mid-husbands know this shit, like GBS. So, I mean, like, he's been at it a long time. He's got a lot of credentials behind his name at this point.
Gladys? Hello? Hello? Okay, honey, I'm gonna tell them that you're coming, okay. And then it's a little pause as you click off and the whole room's lit up with a screen. Yeah, hi, it's Theo. Yeah, I have a patient coming in. Gladys Quinceañera. Yep, she's 25, GBS positive. Yeah, she's feeling uncomfortable. She's saying contractions every 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Yeah, she's second baby. Yep. Okay. Yeah, when you get her there, just start her in, damn it, I can't think in the moment, but you always say the same thing. Yeah, a bolus of fluid, blah, 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 blah.
A bolus of fluid, another one. I mean, like, he's really going for it here. I love it. Not many mid-husbands know the word bolus. For those of you who don't know that word, it's what we call like a lot of fluid all at once through an IV.
Okay, yeah, I'll be right in. And then you hang up, and after you hang up, you always go, motherfucker. Gladys? Hello?
That's probably my favorite part. I mean, all their silly clinical knowledge aside, that's where the mid-husband really comes into play, is being the person who watches us have to go from dead asleep to, I actually have to get up, get out of this bed, drive my car, and then be awake for God only knows how long. So no matter how much we love our job, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of us go, motherfucker, when we first hang up from that call, when we recognize that we have to wake up in the middle of the night. Thank you, Joe and Danielle, for kicking us off. Moving on, I have a couple. You actually know the midwife. She has been on 2 episodes. Her name is Rachel Mast. She is a midwife in Idaho. She is a CPM, catches babies at a beautiful birth center. She is also a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, an amazing athlete. So I've had her on twice talking about fitness in the perinatal period, and also she came on to recount her birth story and talk to us about her experience kind of moving through her own postpartum recovery and returning to fitness herself. So anyway, I'll make sure to link to those episodes. They are fantastic. Anyway, she and her husband, Josh, have shared some things that are special to them about the role of the mid-husband.
Okay, so why don't you start by telling everybody how long you've been a mid-husband?
Well, we've been married for just about 6.5 years, but you could probably add the year we were dating and engaged. Mm-hmm. So about 7.5 years at this point.
So basically you're very experienced.
I mean, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially since midwifery has looked different in the 7.5 years we've been together.
How so?
Well, when we were dating, you were not only a midwife, but you were also a teacher, mm-hmm. or professor of midwifery as well, with cohorts of students. And then when we got married, you were still doing that, and even that took on different capacities, even traveling internationally for that. And then we had moved, and you were just a practicing birth assistant in Austin. Shift work, though, it's basically the same on my end in the sense of you could be called in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And then as we moved back to the Boise area, midwife, you're on call, and mm-hmm. even sometimes you're on call when you're not on call.
Yeah, really.
So yeah, it's still midwifery, but sometimes it might look different in different seasons and in different capacities.
Okay, so before you tell this story, maybe let Tanya's listeners know what a primip is. And I'm curious to know what your definition of a primip is.
Yeah, so I think very simplified, a primip is just a first-time mom who hasn't not given birth before.
Okay, that works. Yep.
So one of my coworkers at the restaurant I was working at a time, his older sister was, I believe, going into labor, and he was updating me, and I asked how long it's been, and it had been a handful of hours, maybe 5 or 6 at the time. And I remember asking him, like, "Oh, is she a primip?" And he's just looked at me like, "What?" I was like, "Is she a primip?" Just me being like a mid-husband, I'm like, I hear this term all the time, not thinking that others don't use this terminology. And he just stares at me, and he says, "She's not a monkey, if that's what you're asking." I was like, "No, like, it's not her first child."
Primip, not primate.
Yes.
And that's when you're a mid-husband and you're not like all the other guys.
Yes.
Oh my God, absolutely hysterical. I literally am just listening to this for the first time right now and recording myself, laughing and feeling the feels about what just happened there. And it actually reminds me of a story that has nothing to do with mid-husbands, but is kind of in the same vein of like when people don't understand terminology. When my kid was in middle school at some point, she told a friend, that I was a midwife, and that friend said back to her something like, "It must be weird having a mom who's pregnant all the time." And my daughter said, "She's a midwife, not a surrogate."
So pretty recently, I took a phone call from a first-time mom who suspected she was in active labor, and I had my suspicions about whether she really was ready to be admitted to the birth center. And so I was asking her questions about her contraction pattern, including how long her contractions were, and I believe she reported them to be 90 seconds long or something to that effect. And I was on the phone with her. You were close by, and I think I said to the client, "Are you having a contraction now?" She said yes. And what did you do?
I immediately just started counting with my fingers up to your face as you're on the phone, and it reached about 30 seconds was like 29, and then she started talking again at the 30-second mark. And I was just like, yeah, nope, that's way too early to go in.
Oh, Josh is very wise at this stage of his career. He knows that you don't want to be admitted to the birth center prematurely, and you want to stay home as long as possible. He's definitely solid with the basics.
What would you say is the strangest phone call that you have overheard between me and a client?
Well, there's been a handful, I know for a fact, but the one that comes to my mind first would be we were actually showering together, and we get a phone call, and you answer very professionally, and then the client just immediately goes into talking about, well, it was on speakerphone, first of all, but the client just goes straight into talking about what she suspects to be vaginal infection. And I'm like pretending to like plug my ears and not listen, but I'm like, well, this is kind of the life, and I know you hear all sorts of things all the time.
And I think I had put it on speaker because I had soap in my hair and I didn't want to touch the phone to my face. That was a bad call.
Yeah. I immediately hopped out of the shower and dried off.
But now you probably know how to cure a yeast infection.
I might need to be reminded, but...
At the birth center where I work, our electronic record system has the question on patients' intake forms, who may we thank for referring you? And recently one of my colleagues pointed out that she had done an intake for a new client, and that question they answered, we can thank Joshua Mast, which is my husband. And so she said to me, Rachel, Joshua is referring people here now? And I kind of put two and two together and realized that this couple Joshua had referred, he knew them through the cigar lounge where he bartends. And I explained to my colleague that, yeah, Joshua finds pretty much any reason to talk about me as a midwife, or I don't even know. What do you talk to people about at the bar? How do you go from cigars and whiskey to midwifery care? How does that transition happen?
I just like to brag about my awesome wife.
Okay.
Natural conversation. You always ask your bartender, what's your life like? What do you do for fun? What's your wife do? You know, I've gotten that working in the service industry for the last, 12 years. You know, it's, you kind of get to know your regulars a little bit on a little bit more personal level. And, I like talking about the things I love, like my wife. And then, the things I think I'm proud of in her, in you. And, being in Idaho, midwifery is not the most well-known thing. Mm-hmm. And so there's some misconceptions that I like to correct pretty promptly if people, share that. Or if they just are super curious, or like, hey, yeah, I know of someone that had a home birth, or, some people know a little bit to like, oh, so does she work with the hospital or out of the hospital? And so, there's always the curious types that ask questions, and it goes into a longer conversation, kind of just snowballs, and then.
And then before you know it, you're giving them my cell phone number, and I'm doing consultations with expectant parents.
Yes, at a local coffee shop. When I didn't even know that was happening, they just asked for your number. It happens.
Yeah, it happens. It's just normal stuff.
Yes.
Compared to husbands that you know that are not mid-husbands, so they don't have a spouse that's a midwife, how does your life look different?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is the amount of times I've driven to some random house that I don't even know where or who this is, and to drop you off some food or coffee.
Usually on the doorstep.
Yep, doorstep, where you might be able to poke your head out for a brief second. And sometimes I'll get lucky enough to get a kiss. But so things like that. the amount of times we've had to say, oh, I guess we'll drive separately to this function or event or this friend's house just because, you're on call. It's like, well, I could drive you, but then you'd be either stuck at the birth center or the home, and I'd have to come get you in the middle of the night. There has been a few times where that has happened. We're like, oh, no, what's the chances of you getting called? And then,
it's famous last words.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not likely that I'll get a call tonight.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, I don't think we've had to rush out of a restaurant, or a date night kind of concept because you're called. I mean, that might have happened once, but
we're usually pretty good about not scheduling dates for nights when I'm on call. And I do have a call schedule that is fairly predictable.
Yeah. But I still would have expected it to happen more. And there's always, that thought's always in the back of my mind. So there's a sense of kind of urgency when there's nothing actually urgent. Yeah. It's kind of moving swiftly through things to then be in a relaxed state for when you do get called. But there's plenty of time where there's been a change of plans, I would say more than the average person. Just the nature of being a midhusband, kind of having to roll with the punches.
I'm also thinking that compared to non-midhusbands, that you buy a ridiculous amount of Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Yep. I would say it's not every time, but more often than not, if you've been at a birth the night before or day before, there will be a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream in the freezer for you. Yep. With me a few bites. I'll get a few bites. Oh, come
on. We share it.
Nah, maybe you might share 2 bites with me.
That's not true. That's not true.
Yeah, okay. I eat more than half of it, actually.
That's right. And case in point, as we're having this conversation, we have a pint of Ben and Jerry's that's waiting for us because I did 3 births in the last 24 hours. And we're going to bust into that.
Yep. Yeah. And you probably get a foot rub. Awesome. You get a lot of foot rubs.
Well, now that's on recording, so I can use that against you. Wait, did you say I'm going to get a lot of rubs?
It's still recording.
Loving these two. Okay. So that was interesting for me to hear because I hadn't really processed how much our call schedule doesn't just affect us, it affects the people we live with. So in all the years that I was on call, I was a single mom and I didn't live with, any partner that I may have been dating. And so, while, I've abandoned shopping carts in the grocery store when on call, that really only affected me. I'm acutely aware of how it affected my child growing up. It's a really different life. But I had not really thought about how that might affect someone's husband. I'm really digging the Ben and Jerry's and the foot rubs, though, so I'm seeing the two-way street. This is where things are a little bit different for me and my midhusband, the newest midhusband on the block, as I've been referring to him. He met me after I admitted that I had burnout to myself, after I had done something about it. He probably saw me more as an entrepreneur than a midwife. In this capacity, he learned a lot about the pelvic floor and particularly how it behaves in pregnant and postpartum people while they're exercising. He knows a diastasis recti when he sees one. But he'll probably never say things like my dear friend Kathy's husband, Pete. Actually, you guys know Kathy. She did an episode with me on postpartum sex. I'll link to that in the show notes. Anyway, her husband, Pete, is, probably the most experienced midhusband I know. Here are some of the silly things he has to say when he is wearing his midhusband hat.
So after all these years of listening to late night calls and back and forth with patients, I feel fully qualified to deliver a baby. I know that I shouldn't apply fundal pressure. I know that the person shouldn't be lying on their back. And if I'm on an airplane and someone is having a baby, I'm all over it. I'm the guy to help.
Let me just say, any husband who talks about fundal pressure and knows that it should be avoided has earned their title.
So when my midwife wife gets called in, I want to know whether it's a primep because it'll be a long time. But I know that if it's a duep or a triceratops, it might not be as long. But if it's a quadriceps, all bets are off.
I'm a gullible gal. Anyone who knows me knows that. I can never tell when somebody's joking or lying to me. It's a nearly impossible task. But even I know he's joking because I know how smart he is. He's, of course, making jokes here, which I can appreciate because at the root of it, he is acknowledging what it feels like to be married to someone who is going to go out and be gone for a long time. And a huge piece of that, in reality, is whether that's a first baby or a subsequent baby.
So when my wife says she may not get home for dinner, I say, turn up the pit.
And I'm going to let him end on that note, which for anyone in the know, you're going like, mwah, 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 which I totally get, but it's a joke. He's joking. We midwives, generally speaking, do not think this way, but our mid-husbands who miss us sometimes do. All right, so now you get to meet my husband, Pablo. Pablo, just for some context, is kind of a sickeningly smart person who knows a lot of things about a lot of subjects. He speaks multiple languages. He learns things so fast, it's kind of scary. He was in the military for 27 years, and yet he listens to classical music and reads poetry and philosophy. He's just like full of contradictions. But he has been approaching this idea about this podcast in a pretty funny way. I think, very differently than the other mid-husbands who I recruited, just to share their thoughts that they didn't know they were going to end up sharing. Whereas, Pablo kind of saw me come up with the idea for this, and, everything since has turned into a little bit of a quiz show. So I'll open it up with what my car rides with him have been like lately. What is vaginismus?
Vaginitis would be an inflammation of the vaginal lining.
Okay.
Vaginismus is when there are conditions that are not favorable for the fertilization of an egg, because the pH balance is less than 4, therefore too acidic, and no way Jose there's going to be a baby in there.
Vaginismus is actually when the body has an automatic response, usually due to fear or something of that nature, where the muscles spasm in relation to vaginal penetration. So nothing to do with fertility or a baby being in there or not, but you can hear that he is pulling from little bits of things he has learned about the vagina and vaginal health over time as he guesses at this one. I'm assuming, I no longer remember for sure, but I'm assuming that we were talking about something and I said vaginismus and he said something like, oh yes, vaginismus, I'm sure I know what that is, or something like that, which is what led him to be put on the spot to try to answer that one. The other thing that's been funny about talking to him is that he will remember the essence of what something is, or what the conversation around a given topic was, but he won't remember what it's called, especially when there are similar named things. So going back to that last clip, you've got vaginitis. He loves the word vaginosis. That's a big one. And then of course vaginismus kind of sounded like it went in there, which is why he took the avenue that he took. Shortly thereafter, we had another conversation, which we'd actually had many times before, about a particular maneuver used in births that he can never remember the names of. So what maneuver are you trying to remember?
It's the one for shoulder dystocia.
Well, is it done early in the process or late in the process?
Well, it's clearly once they don't have any other choices, they have to push the baby back in.
What's it called?
Zaffarelli maneuver.
Nope. Try again.
Zapparelli.
Nope.
It's Italian. Zitangucci. Maybe I don't remember that one.
Zavanelli.
Zavanelli.
But one time you
Isn't that what it
said, no, you didn't, and I can play it back so you hear it. But what I was expecting you to say, that's what I thought you were going to say, was the Zapruder maneuver.
You laughed so hard at me
you
that I
said
stopped
the
saying it.
Zapruder maneuver.
I said Zapruder because that's the film of JFK getting shot. So
what?
The Zapruder film is a very
famous... That's an author? Like a director?
No. What? It's the actual footage that the guy took with an 8mm camera when JFK got shot.
Why has it got that weird name?
Because that's his last name.
It's someone's last name.
It's a man's name. It's John, whatever, something, John Zapruder, let's say. And his film is known as Zapruder film. And it's the only evidence that exists that...
I thought you just made that up.
No.
Zapruder maneuver.
That just sounded right.
And so, as often happens when we're talking about birth and women's health and fitness and all these things, the tables often turn, and in the end, I end up being the one who learned something new. But recently, he hit the nail on the head. He was flipping channels, and he came across a medical show, and he knew exactly what to do if someone has an ectopic pregnancy. So tell me what happened when you were watching Chicago Med the other day.
In the episode, there was a young couple who come in with their first pregnancy, and the doctor says, "What's wrong?" She said, and the mother-to-be says, "Well, it's my first pregnancy, and I don't feel right. I feel like something's wrong." And the doctor was like, "You're probably fine, but let's check you out," and starts doing an ultrasound. And they show the image of the ultrasound, and the whole time I'm thinking, Tanya would think that this is garbage. Like, this is not the way it's done, right? But they show the image of the ultrasound, and I looked at the image of the ultrasound, and I was like, ectopic pregnancy. And the doctor goes, "I have some bad news. You have what we call an ectopic pregnancy." And the young father goes, What does that mean?" And I said, "It's very dangerous to the mother and to the child, and it has to be terminated."
Wait, you said that?
I said it out loud.
You said that out loud, okay.
I'm speaking to the TV.
Got it, okay.
I go, "It's very dangerous to the mother and to the child because the fetus is developing in the fallopian tube, and it could kill the mother, and the pregnancy has to be terminated." And the doctor basically says that, right? And then the mother says, "Well, what are the options? How does this happen?" And I just yelled at the TV. I went, "Methotrexate!" And the doctor says, "Well, there's these pills we use. It's called methotrexate." And I was like, "Yes, I'm a midhusband."
Good one, babe.
Oh, thank you, honey.
And so while he will never see me in the immediate aftermath of a birth, covered in amniotic fluid and meconium and blood, sweat, and tears, he has become and shall remain my biggest supporter, which is the biggest gift of having a midhusband. Thank you for listening to the Mother Wit podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwitmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.